Morning, Mr. Vastapal, Mr. Speaker1, Shiv Kumar, Preeta Reddy, Mr. Ramakrishnan, and of course, Rekha Sethi, all the distinguished delegates to this convention. I must express my deep gratitude to the organizers for having invited me to come and talk to this very knowledgeable and illustrious gathering of managers from all over the country. It's an opportunity which doesn't come easily, and I'm still not quite sure why I was picked, except perhaps for the fact that I've been around for a long time. I asked Rekha what I was supposed to talk about, and I was told that the topic is about igniting growth, and in that what would be the responsibilities not only of the government, but of industry and business also. So that is really going to be what I'm going to talk about today. And I'll try and bring forth an aspect which is not often talked about and which may not also be very palatable or popular with a lot of people who hear this, but which I think is necessary in the kind of economic, social, and political environment which has developed and which will keep developing in India. As we know, manufacturing has spearheaded the growth of economies in various countries, including Japan, Korea, China, Thailand. It's always been manufacturing which has been the leader in the growth of the economy, and manufacturing has at some stage been as much as close to 40% of the GDP. In India, although we have had periods of high growth, manufacturing is still only 15 to 16% of our GDP. Everybody recognizes the importance of manufacturing. The government of India has always recognized the importance of manufacturing, and now the new manufacturing policy included in the 12th plan brings forth the various reasons why manufacturing has to grow much faster. Our growth of the economy has so far been led by the services sector and by the sector for which the minister is here, the IT sector, has been largely responsible for the growth of the economy. But I think it's clear that if we are going to have growth in the future, if we're going to have inclusivity in the growth, if we are going to provide employment to the millions of people who will join the labor force every year from the rural areas, it can only be through manufacturing. And therefore, manufacturing has rightly been given a high priority in the 12th plan. Now, why hasn't manufacturing picked up in India like it has in other countries? Industry, and rightly I believe, points out a lot of shortcomings in India compared to other countries, which has been a handicap in the growth of manufacturing and industry in India. This includes all the shortcomings of the infrastructure sector, which we know about, high cost of inputs, the tax regime and the way the tax regime is implemented, leading to spate of legislation all over the place, spates of lawsuits and cases in courts all over the place, the labor laws, delays in decision-making, and the very high cost of compliance with probably the largest number of laws and regulations of any country in the world. India has been ranked by the World Bank as one of the most difficult countries in which to do business. We rank at number 132. Singapore ranks number 1. Why have these impediments persisted? Till 1991, we had a different kind of economic environment. We were living with planned socialistic developmental policies, and I think many of these shortcomings which I've pointed out were associated with that kind of environment because that's the way it was done at that time. There was a distrust of the private sector, there was a distrust of profit-making, there was a distrust of people accumulating wealth or growing big. The MRTP which existed was a clear indication that people were not expected to grow or become big. The licensing policies restricted people's growth, and all of that was consistent with the kind of impediments which we are pointing out. But what happened after 1991? In 1991, we changed our entire approach to economic development. We became market-oriented. We brought in competition. We opened up to foreign investment. We opened up to foreign technology. The whole picture changed. But this factor of distrust of the private sector, the failure to bring about what in other countries was known or in terms of India Incorporated, has not developed. The businessmen and the government, including the politicians and the bureaucrats, do not work as one team to facilitate the growth of business and industry in India. That's the fundamental fact which holds up the growth, because every country which has had high growth of the economies led by manufacturing has had the equivalent of India Incorporated or a Japan Incorporated or a Korea Incorporated or a China Incorporated. That way it has led to results, but it has not happened here. Equally, the general public and the media have a distrust of most industrialists. They believe that people who set up industries do not use these industries or their businesses to promote the growth and welfare of the country as a whole, but these industries and businesses are operated largely for the benefit of the family and the individual who are the promoters of the business. Now, whether this is a right perception or a wrong perception doesn't really matter. What is important is that this perception is pretty widespread, and it's not something which you can just wish away. There is also a feeling that industrialists have developed over the years, and this was more acute perhaps, started in the license Raj period, when you had to have good relations with certain people so that you could get your licenses renewed or somebody's license stopped. That the nexus exists between politicians and some businessmen, and that while this nexus is not open, it is used to further individual businesses for individual benefit. Now, this again, whether it's there or not, is not the issue. The question is that large numbers of people, the public, the media, believe that such nexuses exist. The recent scams which have happened in the last year, year and a half, again, without going into the merits of those scams, whether they were really scams or not, the fact is people believe that they were large scams. And those scams, again, strengthen the belief that business and industry are actually having a nexus, and that both use the resources of the nation to enrich certain individual people. And that creates the distrust and makes the distrust even deeper than what it used to be prior to 1991. The distrust has only grown, it has not lessened. Along with this, people see that over the last few years, salary disparities, the earnings of the top businessmen, the managing directors, the CEOs of companies, and what others earn, including the workers and people at large in the country, has grown enormously. Newspaper reports these figures from time to time. It's reported in magazines. People get to read it. The media today is such that any of this kind of information is no longer a secret, but is widely known to people. The disparities in this respect are growing. And what makes it worse is that ostentatious consumption, which was at one time confined largely to North India, is spreading to other parts of India also. And areas which were known for the frugality and simplicity of various functions and events are becoming more and more ostentatious, more and more showy in what is happening. And that also creates the kind of feeling amongst people that India is now two Indias, the one of the very rich and the haves, and the other of the have-nots. And this is creating the kind of social tensions which we should all worry about for the future. Salary disparities I mentioned. Why have they grown so much? I think one of the reasons is that we have more or less adopted the American way, the Western way of thinking of salaries and rewards for top people, and not looked at other options which exist in the world and which have been used very effectively to develop strong, industrialized manufacturing countries. You take a country like Germany, the ratio between the top salaries of the CEOs and of the workers there, of equivalent amount of service, is somewhere around 10 times, 11 times, 12 times, no more than that. In Japan, this ratio is even lower. It comes down to 6 to 7 times. There's hardly any president of a Japanese company whose earnings in a year is more than about $500,000. $500,000 is perhaps earned by thousands of people in India today at much lower levels, and there'll be few CEOs of any company of any size who are earning less than $500,000. There are very few CEOs in Japan even who would reach $1 million. Now, if the cost of living in these countries is so much higher than in India, and it leads one to think that why is it that countries like Japan and Germany, who have done so well in the way of industrializing those countries, have managed with this kind of salary differences and worker salaries and management salaries. But in India, we have not industrialized, but we have created a salary disparity of 800 times, 1,000 times between the worker's salary and the management salary. Something to think about. And it is something which also, we must understand, creates a divide between the workers and the management, between the public and the owners and promoters of industries in terms of how they are perceived, in what terms of what they are doing to the country. We need to understand that the political establishment has to maintain an image in the public which is consistent with what the public opinion is and what the political establishment looks at as being expected of them in respect of the people. And in this context, therefore, it cannot be expected that the political establishment, doesn't matter which party it relates to, is clearly close to the businessmen, supporting businessmen, felicitating the growth of businessmen, functioning like India Incorporated. It can only happen when the perception of the people in the country changes, when the media adopts a different stance, that the growth of business is actually good for the country, that it is not being used to enrich individual people, it is not being used to siphon legitimate tax money out of the industry and goes into private ostentatious consumption, but it's being used to run industries, that these industries are being run and managed almost like as if they belong to a trust of the nation, not as individual-owned companies. That perception does not exist, and in the absence of that perception, it's very difficult for the political establishment to become close in terms of felicitating business and going out of its way to see that decisions are taken in a manner which would make business more competitive. I believe that if industry is going to grow to what the 12th plan and the new manufacturing policy states, namely that it should grow 3 to 4% faster than the GDP, that it should become 25% of the GDP in the next 10 years. It can only happen if the entire governmental apparatus is actually working to promote the competitiveness of business so that Indian manufactured goods, Indian products are not only sold in India, but they become exportable products, they become competitive in the international markets, that the cost of these come down. Now, they can't come down unless some of the impediments which we talked about are removed. Why are projects delayed? Why don't civil servants take decisions? Why are they hesitant to take decisions? I think we need to go into the cause of this also, because we cannot find the solutions to these problems unless we go into the root cause of the problems. And as far as civil servants are concerned, I think it's the lack of trust in the civil servants which has been there from the beginning, from the time independence took place, because even at the time when the independence struggle was taking place, civil servants were seen as being siding with the government, with the British government, against the struggle for independence. And that kind of distrust has never been removed afterwards, because over time we have seen that civil servants were implementing the license Raj, the control Raj, and subsequently they were looked upon as people who were influenced by people with money and things of that kind, and they never became people who were trusted. Equally, the politician has to put in systems and laws and regulations which were designed to show to the people that civil servants were kept under strict control. At one time, in the earlier stages of my career, when I was a civil servant, the rule said that you will not even have dinner with an industrialist. The idea was to show that we were keeping distance from these people. In reality, that was never happening. In reality, something else was happening, but it was all happening under the table. So kind of rules and regulations which were framed are all designed to show distrust. And the result is, over time, civil servants have found that it's more beneficial to them to not take decisions, not take risk, become totally risk averse, because taking any kind of risk or innovative steps could lead to their careers getting adversely affected. But taking risk and doing innovative things to promote a new idea or a new thought, even if it leads to good results, doesn't get them any credit anywhere. So people have, in the way of developing their self-preservation and instinct of survival, adopted the route which gives them the best chance of surviving in the kind of atmosphere which has developed in India. And therefore, projects get delayed because people will not take decisions. They get delayed when there is a dispute with the contractor. The contractor's disputes with the project implementing authority are not sorted out, that people are afraid that if they took a decision, they will be hauled up for favoring the party. Tax litigation takes place because the tax people are afraid to take the right decisions. They rather leave it to the courts to take decisions. And all of this adds to the whole cost of compliance, litigation, delays, and things not happening. This is not going to change either unless, again, the whole atmosphere of distrust is removed. Now, how should this be removed? Who should take the initiative in building trust? I think the initiative has to come from industry and business. It cannot be expected to come from the political establishment. And industry and business, unless they start thinking about what kind of political, economic, and social environment India has, what is it that we need to do, unless they think about it and understand that unless they are seen as living a much more frugal life, as they are seen as reducing the disparities which exist between them and the lesser well-off people, not the non-promoters of industry, if there is a voluntary regulation on their own conduct and behavior, we try and create a more egalitarian kind of structure in industry, something like the way Japan and Germany have done, then I think we can begin to see a beginning of change. But unless that happens, if the current systems are persisted with, I do not see change happening. I do not see, therefore, that we can do very much in terms of what we are talking about, igniting growth. I do not see that manufacturing will make a big jump and go forward in large measures, that we will become internationally competitive, because I think the people who take decisions, who are supposed to implement, will continue to behave as they have behaved. They will look to see what will protect them from adverse consequences, and I don't see how anything can happen. So my view is that if we are going to do something in this area, all of us, as managers, as people who run industries, as people who run businesses, must give much more thought to the longer-term issues of India. What is going to happen 5 years from today, 10 years from today, how our economies are going to shape up, what is going to be the impact of millions of people coming into the working force if these people do not get jobs, or if they're totally dissatisfied, if their aspirations are very different from what their reality will be. How will society shape up? How will the politician adopt a different course from what it is doing today? And how do we then become more competitive? Please think about this, because it's an issue which is going to be live in the next decade for us, and we need to worry about it. Thank you very much.